This Day in Sports History. It's This Day in Sports History, a member of the Sports History Network. It's September 20th, and on this day in 1969, it was one of the greatest acts of sportsmanship in sports history. Okay, before I get started, understand that I'm not a big fan of hyperbole, the greatest, most spectacular, earth-shaking, or most significant descriptors are for AI-generated text for the most part. But what Jack Nicklaus did on this day was truly one of the great gestures in sports. I can't really imagine this happening today, and it's hard to say how many would have done it even back then. So this is the 1969 Ryder Cup, played that year at Royal Birkdale in northwest England. A couple of things to know about this edition of the Ryder Cup. One, whereas now the Ryder Cup is the U.S. versus the Europeans, at this point it was the U.S. versus Great Britain and Ireland. Second, the U.S. had dominated this competition for the past decade. The GB&I side had not won the Ryder Cup since 1957, and thus there was a lot of animosity. The GB&I captain was Eric Brown, and he wanted his squad to give no quarter to the Americans. One of their golf balls goes into the deep rough or the gorse, it's not your problem, it's theirs. Don't help them, he told his team. The roster had been expanded for this and future Ryder Cups to allow for 12 players on a team. The Brits had one advantage in that most of their guys had Ryder Cup experience, while most of the American side, including multiple major winner Jack Nicklaus, were Ryder Cup rookies. Tony Jacklin was an Englishman who spent most of his time in the U.S. playing on the PGA Tour. Most of the guys on the U.S. team were friends of his, but he knew for at least 3 days he had to put those friendships aside and play to win. In the opening day rounds, he and his partner Peter Townsend gave the GB&I team 2 points. On day two's 4-ball rounds, Jacklin was part of a duo that took 1.5 points. So he'd taken 3.5 out of a possible 4 points in the first 2 days. Heading into the final singles matches on this day, the U.S. had 8 points, and Great Britain and Ireland had 8 points. Jacklin was put into a match with Niclaus, then considered to be the best golfer on the planet. This was the anchor match of the 8 to be played. Jacklin dominated the morning round, beating Jack 4-3. After the morning singles, the Brits had a 2-point advantage. The afternoon battles were fierce. When American Gene Littler rolled in his putt at 17, he closed out Ireland's Christy O'Connor 2-1, and the competition was all square again. That left Niclaus and Jacklin to decide it. Through the first 17 holes, the lead had changed hands 4 times. Niclaus came to the 17th one up. 17 was a reachable par 5. Jacklin's second shot got a friendly bounce and roll and ended up in front of the green about 50 feet from the hole. Niclaus hit an even better shot, hitting the green and leaving himself 25 feet for eagle. Jacklin's second shot got a friendly bounce and roll and ended up in the front of the green about 50 feet from the hole. Niclaus hit an even better shot, hitting the green and leaving himself 25 feet for eagle. Jacklin pulled out his putter and he lined up his shot. He just wanted to get it close, but instead, he dunked it, riding up and down swales and breaking a couple of times before dropping in the cup. His 50-foot bomb evened the match back up when Nicklaus's eagle putt slid by. So now, final match of the afternoon singles on the final day of the Ryder Cup is all square, coming to the final hole. After they hit their tee shots safely in the fairway, Niclaus called to Jacklin, walked up to him, put an arm around him as they walked off the tee, and asked, "Are you nervous?" Jacklin said, yeah, I'm petrified." And Niclaus said, "Yeah, me too." Both men knew the entire Ryder Cup rode on their shoulders, but at least they could share each other's anxiety as they approached their second shots. Niclaus hit his to about 20 feet. Jacklin's ball soared over the pin and came to rest in the back of the green, a bit further away. Jacklin putt first, and he rolled it to within between 20 and 36 inches. I've read different accounts of this, but 2 feet to 3 feet from the hole is what people were saying that day. Close, but still a knee knocker under the circumstances, right? Well, Niclaus was a bit hopped up on adrenaline, and he smoked his putt 5 feet past. He settled his nerves, and he rolled in the 5-footer for par. Niclaus reached into the cup, grabbed his ball, and then he reached over and picked up Tony's ball mark, conceding the putt. Jack looked Tony in the eye and said, "I don't think you would have missed that, but given the circumstances, I don't want to give you the opportunity to." This moment is now known as the Concession, and the match and the Ryder Cup ended in a tie. Since the Americans were the defending champs, technically a tie meant the cup stayed with them, but a further acknowledgement to the hard-fought battle. The Americans offered to share it with the GB&I side for the next 2 years. It was a great act of sportsmanship, but not everybody was so thrilled about Jack's gesture. U.S. Captain Sam Snead was pretty upset that an opportunity for an outright win had been given away. On this day in 1973, Billie Jean King finally shut Bobby Riggs up in the Battle of the Sexes. So I talked about this back in May when Riggs had challenged Margaret Court to a match that became the Mother's Day Massacre when Riggs beat Court in straight sets. By most accounts, Court just figured Riggs for a clown and did not take the match seriously until it was too late. Riggs, a bit lippy before the match, even got more brazen after beating Court about how much better men were than women. He became the poster boy for male chauvinism, and he stalked his next opponent, Billie Jean King, relentlessly. After the Court match, King realized the importance to women in their fight for equality and agreed to the Battle of the Sexes match played on this night in Houston's Astrodome. Riggs knew how to put on a show, and so when the players arrived to the court, they did so in sexist style. King was brought in on a golden litter carried by 4 shirtless and buff dudes. Riggs was pulled in a rickshaw by 6 bikini-clad models. Riggs presented King with a giant sucker. King gifted Riggs a baby pig. There were 30,000 people in the Astrodome. Some sitting courtside paid $100 a ticket, which would be like paying close to $600 apiece in today's money. That is still the largest crowd to watch a tennis match live in the U.S. Along with that, ABC bought the rights to carry it in primetime, and an estimated 50 million watched domestically. And thanks to satellite, the match was beamed to 36 countries worldwide, for a total viewing audience estimated to be around 90 million. It was all fun until the ball went into the air, and then it was serious tennis. Early on, Riggs broke King's serve, and at that moment, the full weight hit her. She knew she had to win this match. King broke Riggs twice in the first set to win 6-4. Now, there was a huge age difference in this one. King was in her prime and still winning major tournaments. She was 26 years younger than Riggs and used that to her advantage, getting the drop shots and retreating for lobs and hitting winners. She played a baseline game to start, moving the older Riggs all over the court and then switched to a serve and volley game. She won 26 of the first 34 points. King took the second set, 6-3, and then in the third, she wore Riggs down to the point of exhaustion and won 6-3 in the third to win in straight sets. It was a winner-take-all match, with Billie Jean King taking the $100,000 winner's check. On this same day, but far away in another baseball stadium, the Pittsburgh Pirates had a 1-game lead over the New York Mets in the National League East as they played the second game of a 3-game series in Shea Stadium. This game was tied at 3 and went to extra innings. It stayed that way into the top of the 13th, when Pittsburgh's Dave Augustin came to the plate with 2 outs and a man on first. Augustin ripped the 2-1 offering high and deep to left. The ball hit the very top of the wall and miraculously ricocheted back onto the field to a waiting Cleon Jones. The relay throw to the plate was perfect, and Richie Zisk, who had taken off from the first crack of the bat, was meat at the plate. Now, the ricochet defied physics, mathematics, the laws of the universe. It poked a hole in the space-time continuum and created alternate realities. But What should have been a 2-run homer to give the Pirates at least a 2-run lead heading into the bottom half and potentially winning the game to extend their lead in the East turned into no runs, and the Mets winning 4-3 with a run in the bottom half. The Mets then went on to win the NL East by 1.5 games over St. Louis and finished 2.5 games in front of Pittsburgh. On this day in 1934, it was the last legal spitball thrown. If you recall the story I did recently on Gaylord Perry, then you know that the spitball doesn't always equate to saliva. In fact, it rarely does. But it can be any substance added to the cover that greases the ball a little bit, makes it dance or break a little bit more than a dry one does. But the term spitball is all-encompassing, and it had been outlawed 14 years earlier in 1920. But 17 players had been grandfathered in and could continue pitching the spitter legally until they retired. Well, on this day, it was the last appearance of the last remaining legal spitballer, Burley Grimes. Even though he was inserted as a relief pitcher in this one and only threw one complete inning, there is little doubt that he threw at least one spitter, and probably more. Grimes was known to be among the most prolific and aggressive lubers of the baseball, with his preferred substance being slippery elm. He faced 3 Brooklyn Dodgers, struck out 1, and retired the other 2 with ground balls. It didn't figure too much in the outcome. The Dodgers won the game 2-1, with the historical footnote of the last of the legal spitballers making his final appearance. Grimes finished his 19-year career with 270 wins and over 1,500 strikeouts. He was elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1964. And on this day in 2003, Rashaun Woods had a great day on the gridiron. The 2-1 Oklahoma State Cowboys were on the road at SMU. Woods was a senior wide receiver coming off a year where he'd been a consensus All-American. At this point in his college career, he'd already had 14 100-yard receiving days, and he'd caught a lot of touchdown passes. But he was about to make his mark on the record book. He got things started early on, reeling in a 2-yard TD pass to take advantage of a Mustang turnover. The Cowboys took a 14-0 lead when he caught another one in the closing seconds of the first quarter. On the next Okie State play, quarterback Josh Fields went to the air again and connected with Woods for a 34-yard touchdown. Offensive coordinator at the time, Mike Gundy, did not want to stop the touchdown train, and so when the Cowboys got the ball back, they put it back in the air on the first play for a 32-yard touchdown strike. 3 straight Cowboy offensive plays, 3 consecutive TD hookups between Fields and Woods. No reason to put the horse back in the barn just yet. Woods caught a 25-yarder for another score with 8.5 to play in the half, and that set the NCAA record for TD catches in a half. But they weren't quite done. The first stringers came back out in the third quarter, and Woods reeled in 2 more for scores for a total of 7 touchdown receptions in a 52-6 rout of SMU. Woods' 7 TD catches is still the Division I record, but it's one shy of the record for all divisions. Paul Zaske played for the Division II North Park Vikings from Chicago, and in a 1968 game caught 8 touchdown passes against North Central College. Time now for today's Nothing to Do with Sports Fun Fact. The original name for Toy Story's Buzz Lightyear was Lunar Larry. That's all I've got for you today. This and every episode of This Day in Sports History is researched, written, voiced, and produced by me, Steve White. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you back here tomorrow for another edition of This Day in Sports History. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.